my biggest piece of advice would be try to pray for an open mind. Pray for an open mind and an open heart, because even if you don't believe in God, just pray. Just take my word for it. Because in the beginning, for me, I just would say, help me. I just would say, because I didn't know what to say. And then I was taught very early on, you also need to say thank you. Even if that's all you say, help me and thank you, that's enough. God knows what you need.
Welcome to Sheila's Take, your go-to podcast for thoughtful insights on love, faith, health, fitness, relationships, and navigating today's challenges through a spiritual perspective. Join me, Sheila Dunbar, as we explore various aspects of life with a mindful and godly approach. Tune in for engaging discussions on all things meaningful and transformative. Welcome back to Sheila's Take, the podcast where I dive deep into the stories of transformation, resilience, and faith. Today, I have a guest whose life journey is a testament to the power of recovery and spiritual awakening. Growing up with an alcoholic and abusive father who was also a minister, Jessica Morris found herself burdened with doubt about God's love. Her path led through the dark corridors of addiction and away from organized religion. But when she hit rock bottom, Jessica found the strength and courage to step into recovery. In her transformative journey, two extraordinary mentors, Steve, the addictions counselor, and Paul, the chaplain, guided her towards healing and understanding. Through their support, Jessica not only confronted her past, but also discovered a renewed passion for spirituality. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome my guest to Sheila's Take. Welcome, Jessica. How are you?
I'm wonderful, Sheila. It's great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, anytime, anytime. I wanted to, first of all, thank you for sharing your story with my listeners and your journey. And it's just a little bit of it that I know it's very encouraging, and I just can't wait um, to hear more about it. So I want to just jump right into your childhood. And you mentioned that your father, who was a minister, dealt with alcoholism and was abusive. Can you go into that a little bit?
Sure. My dad I'm the youngest of four
Hmm.
children, and I was born in 1970, so
Okay.
completely different time period.
Right. Yes.
Um, and my father and mother got married when they were both very young. I mean, well, actually, my father was 19 when they got married.
Wow.
My mom was 4 years older than he was.
Hmm.
So at that point for her, they got married in 1959, she was an old maid. I mean, I know that doesn't sound like an
Wow.
old maid now, but she wanted children.
Yeah.
And she was getting too old already at 23. And so they started having kids
Mhm.
pretty much right away. So while he was in seminary, and this is all I'm speaking, of course, in hindsight, when I was a kid, he was just a jerk who was an alcoholic.
Yeah.
But I see him in a completely different light now. But I think he was going through seminary. He was trying to find his way. I mean, at 19, who knows
Hmm.
who they really are?
Right.
And he just got caught up in alcoholism. I do believe there was some mental illness there that was never diagnosed. And I also think there were some other addictions that he never talked about, but I think they were there. I don't really want to go into too much detail there, but he was definitely called to be a minister. I want to be real clear about that. He was a very good minister. He
Mhm.
preached like nobody's business. I
Yeah.
mean, even when I was mad at him, I got a lot out of what he had to say. And he was very energetic, inviting. People in our town loved him. My mom was raised by an alcoholic,
Hmm.
so she was very good at playing the role of, dutiful wife. She
Yeah.
was a teacher in the town where we lived, and so on the outside, things looked pretty dang good,
Yeah.
and what happened was, I think, my father could only truly be like, even though he did drink publicly, I grew up in sort of a hunting blue collar town.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if he went out and had a drink with the guys, he fit right in, and they really liked that the pastor drank with them because it made them feel better.
Right.
And so, but he never really could be let the real feelings out until he came home, whatever they were, and it always seemed to spill out on us. I don't remember him being abusive physically towards my mom,
Mhm.
but my siblings tell me that he was. At one point, a neighbor threatened him. A neighbor that my mom confided in threatened him and said, "If you ever touch her again, you're done."
Wow.
And so, but then it came on us. It came on the kids.
Mhm.
And so he was, I think for me, honestly, I would rather he had hurt me physically than some of the things he said to me, because the abuse that I received from him verbally was sometimes sexual in nature. I mean, it was just all over the map. At one point, he told me I was a mistake and that my parents didn't want me. They only wanted 3 kids. I mean, it kind of, and it was like I was really just looking to him as my minister too. And so I had this feeling or this belief that God must think I'm a mistake too. If my dad thinks that, and God chose my dad to be the minister,
Mhm.
he must know the truth.
Right. Yeah.
And so it was such a weird, and I always growing up, I always really loved Jesus. Um I felt a real sort of brother sister thing going on there with Jesus, and I don't know how old you are, and I'm really gonna age myself when I say this, but there was a mini series on television when I was a kid. This was back before I mean, we had 3 channels when I was growing up, and there was this mini series that they used to play at Easter every year, and
Mhm.
it was called Jesus of Nazareth, and it was, I wanna say it was like a 4-night thing where it
Mhm.
was kind of like a it was a mini series,
Okay.
and it went from his birth until his resurrection, and all kinds of major celebrities were in it. It was a big deal
Mm.
that these celebrities that were normally movie stars were on television. This was back when movie stars were in the movies and TV people were in
Right. They were separate.
yeah, exactly, and so we had just gotten a VCR, and I recorded it, and I watched it over and over and over again, and that actor, Robert Powell, his name was, who played Jesus, became Jesus in
Mhm.
my mind, in my imagination, and I absolutely adored him. Not the actor, I adored who he was playing. He was
Mhm.
very
Yeah.
peaceful in this movie, very calm, and not at all confrontational. And I came to this sort of weird, perverse understanding of the father-son relationship there, that the reason why Jesus understands me is because his dad punished him too. His dad
Mm.
abused him too, because how I looked at it was God made him do this. And in the movie, it was the first movie where they really sort of showed, not like Passion of the Christ or
Right.
anything like
Mhm.
that, but they showed him getting beat and made fun of and spit on and all that stuff. And so you saw all of it on television, and I could identify with that. And here's the beautiful thing about it is that that kept me connected my whole time when I was running away from the church. I still knew that Jesus loved me, and I still knew that Jesus could understand me even when, like, so I never became agnostic or atheist or anything like that, because I
Mhm.
knew if nothing else, God might not like me and God might think I'm a mistake, but Jesus loves me.
Wow.
And I was able to hold on to that. And I don't even know if that answered your question. That was a
That's
lot.
that's that's beautiful. That's beautiful, you know. But I'm wondering, would you say like your childhood experiences with your father kind of shaped your initial perceptions of faith and spirituality then?
Yes, and in a weird way, it was somewhat good and somewhat bad,
Mhm.
like, the bad stuff that I just talked about, but
Right,
like I
right.
said, my dad was a great minister. He opened our home to people. He was very Jesus-like in that
Yeah,
way, like,
yeah.
the way he ministered to the people in our congregation. He was just really good with people, and he was good with every people, like every person,
Mm.
I remember this one time, I'll never forget, how you remember, like, certain bits of your childhood real clearly, and there was this one time,
Right.
and we lived in a little tiny town, but up at the end of town, we lived right off of a major highway, and, I lived in New Jersey, and there was a truck stop right up at the end of town. And these truckers came to his service one Sunday morning. They must have been, coming through, and they asked at the truck stop, "Where can we go to church?" And they were in, like, it was sort of summery, and they had their sleeves, ripped off, and so their
Mhm.
arms were hanging out, and they were wearing jeans, but they came up to for communion, and they did, like, this, like, bow down thing where they
Yeah.
were really, and, we were a Methodist church where everybody, was put in their
Button
clothes
up.
properly and wearing
Yeah.
the right hat and everything, and these guys are, like, in their jeans. There's my dad loved them. He
Yeah.
loved them, like, they took him out and showed him their truck and everything, and, like, it just like, that's just the kind of guy he was, and so I did see a lot of goodness there
Mhm.
too, which is so odd to even say, because of the other stuff, the
Yeah.
other stuff of me. For a long time, I was terrified of my father. And I remember when my dad did eventually get into recovery, and I remember I was in my 20s when he got into recovery, and it was the first time in my life that I wasn't afraid of him,
Oh.
simply because
Mm.
he was sober.
Yeah, yeah.
And so it for a very long time, I was angry at God. I could not understand this, why I was in this family, you know?
Mhm.
And at the same time, my oldest sister, who's 6 years older than I am, she's the oldest in the family,
Mhm.
she is a guardian angel. I mean, she took me as if I were her own. I really do kind of consider her my parents because
Yeah.
um, my mom was really she was burnt by the time I showed up, I mean, there's 3 kids and a husband who was running around on her
Mhm.
and, who knows how much debt they were in,
Yeah.
that kind of stuff, and my mother made sure we got everything we needed, and so she was tired.
Yeah.
So, my sister just took me on as her own, I think, and so when I look at it in that way, I'm like, "Well, of course I was in that family because my sister was, God put her there for me or he put me there for her or
Mhm.
both."
Right.
And, because she doesn't have any children. She's the only of my siblings that doesn't have, and I don't. Neither one of us have children, but my 2 middle siblings, they both do, and when I graduated from seminary, she was there with the biggest smile on her
Mhm.
face with
Yeah.
the shirt that had the school on it and everything. I mean, she was so proud of me, and it just was like she's been very parental and at the same time a best friend.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's hard to talk about in the sense that it was a horrible childhood because it wasn't,
Mhm.
I mean, there were a lot of really horrible moments and things that stayed in my psyche that I really needed to excavate later.
Yeah.
You know?
You mentioned that you were angry with God, and you also did have doubt about God's love.
Mhm.
Um, why? Was it because of your father or
Yes, it was I think at a very young age, I also there was, my dad's father was very promiscuous.
Mhm.
And, I don't know what this would look like today, but he was constantly pinching women, pinching
Mhm.
their behinds and
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. And he did it to us as kids too.
Yeah.
And so between him and my dad, who was not abusive to my mother physically in front of us, but he would say inappropriate things to her in front of us.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I got this idea that women are only good for
One
this.
thing. Yes.
And if they're not doing that, the man's gonna be mad at them, and, those types of things, and it just was when I remember when I went off to college, like, thinking to myself, "I'm gonna be different. I'm gonna do
Mhm.
things differently," I'm not gonna be like my mother. I'm not gonna let any
Yeah.
man, guide me around or lead me around. And, it's inevitable.
Yeah.
If that's what you grow up with, that's what you know, at least in my experience, then
Mm.
there was a really nice guy who liked me, like, really, really nice guy who liked me during my sophomore year of college, and I could not get rid of him fast enough. I did not know what to do with him. Like, I look back on it now and I think, "Oh, I
Did you
didn't."
feel like you didn't deserve him?
Probably.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I was much more interested in the druggie down the street who,
Yeah.
was gonna leave
Yeah.
me at some bar,
Mhm.
by myself,
Yeah.
I mean, it was what I was attracted to because it was what I knew how to deal with,
Right. Right.
and so all of that, I just kept looking to God saying, "All I ever wanted was to have someone who loved me, and you
Yeah.
can't even give me a man who loves me," and he was giving me, he was giving me a lot.
Yes.
Hindsight, you can
Yes.
see all those things, right? Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. What was the pivotal moment? Because you were dealing with addictions, what was the pivotal moment during the lowest point that you realized that you needed to seek recovery?
Oy. Um, well, my sister, who I mentioned,
Mhm.
about a year before I got into recovery, now my addictions are food and alcohol.
Mhm.
And I can say that my very first memories of life are regarding food. Like, food has been my main problem my entire life. Like, I used it to control everything. I tried to
Yeah.
control my body with it, and that failed miserably several times.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then I learned that, you can go out and have fun drinking and not be a jerk. So I started drinking, and now I do believe that some addiction is genetic. And so it's in my genes already, coming
You're
from
right.
both my
Right.
mom's side and my dad's side. And so I just very quickly became a blackout drunk. And my sister came to me and said I was out of college several years, and I had gotten a new job in a new town,
Mhm.
and I invited my siblings to come to just stay over one night and see my new place and the new
Mhm.
town and everything. And, we had, like, a little stay-at-home party, like, my brother brought a case of beer and,
Mhm.
we just sat around and talked and everything. And the next morning, or at least that's what I thought happened. The next
Okay.
morning, my brother and my middle sister were gone, and my oldest sister was there by herself. And I said, "Where'd everybody go?" And she said, "Well, they didn't want to stay for this part." And I said, "What are you talking about?" And she sat me down and she said, "The way you drank last night scared me. I've been scared by your drinking for a long time." And she said, "I am not going to watch you do to yourself what our father did to our family."
Mm.
And she said, I'm gonna leave. I'm gonna go, and I just needed to tell you this."
Yeah.
And I found out later that she asked my brother and my other sister to do it with her, and they were like, they didn't want any part of it. And okay, I get that, but I look back on that, and while it was another year till I got into recovery, that was when I started to go back to counseling.
Mhm.
Because I wanted to prove this is the insanity of being in denial. I wanted to prove to my sister there was nothing wrong with me.
Ooh. Wow.
So I got a counselor
Mhm.
and, I was gonna show her, right? And after I was with the counselor for almost a year, she said to me, you have a lot of childhood trauma issues that need to be dealt
Mhm.
with. Absolutely. She said, but until you get your addictions under control, she said, it's none of it's gonna stick. You this these your f she said, "The food especially," she said, "You don't stop talking about it the whole time you're here." And honestly, Sheila, I didn't even remember talking to her about it.
Mm.
But apparently I was going in there and I was telling her how I can't stop eating, I'm gaining weight,
Yeah.
I wish I could just stop eating, and she said to me, she said, "This is blocking you from God. It's blocking you from people. It's blocking you from everything." And she sent me to recovery. She said, and I was thinking to myself, I'm paying her $90 a week. I can't believe she's sending me somewhere that you don't have to pay any money. You just show
Yeah.
up to meetings. And she said to me, she said, look, she said, you can come back. And she said, if once you get yourself clean and we can do the work. And I was like, okay, whatever, so I went, and all I can say about that first meeting is that I heard myself in pretty much everybody who shared,
Mhm.
and what I saw from everybody who shared was peace, and I did not know peace.
Wow. Yeah.
I never knew peace, and I remember thinking to myself, "This is insane," because I really didn't think anybody else did with food what I did with food. I mean, I was a binge eater, and I had seen movies about people who were bulimics or
Mhm.
anorexics, but I even prayed to be those so that someone would help me. But I was a binge volume eater, or I would do like an exercise bulimia kind of thing where I would, eat a pizza and then I would go run 10 miles.
Wow.
Or, because I tried to make myself throw up and I couldn't.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I would get rid of it through exercise, or I would spend 4 days smoking cigarettes and drinking Diet Coke, and then I would allow myself 2 days to binge. It was just all kinds of very
Mhm.
unhealthy
Yeah,
insanity,
yeah.
and I did not think other people did this. And so I'm sitting in my first meeting, and I'm listening to people talk, and they're saying things out loud that I had
Mhm.
never told anybody. And I knew I was exactly where I needed to be, and I wanted out of there so fast.
You saw yourself in them.
Yeah, oh, absolutely,
Yeah, yeah.
absolutely. And as I was trying to get out of the meeting when it was over, because I just wanted to get away from it, it freaked me out. Like, even though I knew it was exactly what I needed, this woman came sort of running towards me. I could see she was making like a beeline right towards me. And she said, because I cried through most of the meeting. It
Mhm.
really was very powerful. And she came up to me afterwards and she said to me, she called me by my name, which really surprised me because I had only when they asked for newcomers in the beginning, I said my name, but there were probably about, I want to say about 30 or 40 people in the
Yeah,
room. So it
yeah.
kind of surprised me she remembered my name.
Mhm.
So I turned and I looked at her and she looked right in my eyes and she said to me, "Jessica, please come back. Please come back. I can tell you belong here."
Yeah.
And I thought, well, crap, I'm gonna have to come back.
Yeah, yeah.
But I see now that was Jesus. That was because he knew I couldn't look at him at that time. I was
Mhm.
too blocked. He knew he could get to me through somebody who was
Yeah.
just like me.
That's beautiful. That actually is beautiful.
Yeah.
You have now you mentioned you had a mentor, you have 2 mentors, Steve and Paul, who affected your journey toward healing and discovering your spiritual path. How did they do that?
Well, Steve was, when I went back after I started to get clean, okay,
Mhm.
and I went to look for that counselor that I had mentioned previously, she had moved out of the area. So I was like, "Oh, no, what am I gonna do?" And,
Mhm.
one of the other women in the program suggested this man, Steve. He was a certified addictions counselor who was pretty well known in my community where I live. And he did a lot of group work and childhood trauma, family disease of alcoholism. And he did a lot of role playing
Mm-hmm.
therapy.
Right,
And,
right.
and it was all new to me. The counselors that I had been to were sit down and talk, you know?
Mm.
He
Yeah.
was very much, experiential and also one of the kindest people I have ever met in my entire life. I mean, so gentle and yet at the same time strong, that kind of person
Yes.
who just has
Mm-hmm.
that way about them. He never mentioned ever what his religion was, what his spiritual beliefs were. He did mention God on occasion because in recovery, people do talk about higher power or God, but they don't say anything beyond that
Right.
because they don't want to make you feel like you have to believe a certain thing. And so he was very good at not, inserting his beliefs on anything. But I can tell you that he was as close to Jesus on this earth that I think I'll ever get.
Really?
Very, compassionate, kind, gentle, like I said, strong, honest. He was really honest with us without being hurtful.
Mm-hmm.
And I say us because I was in a women's group for about 3 years with him. That was phenomenal. And basically what he helped me to do is to look up. And by that, I mean, when I first started working with him, I could not make eye contact with people when I was talking with them. I could not look I would, like, put my face down in my knees when I was telling him things about my childhood, because I had so much shame, I had so
Mm-hmm.
much, uh, like, just guilt-ridden, about everything in my life, whether it was my fault or not.
Mm-hmm.
It was my fault. And so by the time I left group, which was about 4 years later, I'll never forget what he said. When people were leaving group, we would have a night where we would just focus on that person and we would
Mm.
share what we saw in them and the change that we saw in them. And all he said to me was, "Jessica, the best thing in the world is that I'm talking to your face right now.
Wow. Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
looking at your eyes and you're looking at my eyes and you're smiling." And it just that's just the kind of guy he was. He took very little credit for a lot of things. Like, often I would send him thank you cards after the fact, like, I'd be like,
Mhm.
"Steve, you won't believe what happened, this happened and I was strong through it," or whatever. And he would always if I would see him somewhere after he got that card, he'd be like, "That's really from God, it's not from me."
Yeah.
He was very humble in that way
Mhm.
that he definitely was gifted. He was gifted. And so he helped me to sit up straight, to make eye contact, to
Mhm.
know that I was worth people's time,
Yeah.
to even share my story. Um, and never once told me what I had to believe. He was just all about love. He really
Mhm.
was just all about love. And Paul then, on the other hand, came into the picture right around the time I was finishing that counseling work.
Mhm.
So, I was with Steve for about 4 years in my early recovery, and then Paul became the chaplain where I worked. I worked at a college, and he was the new chaplain. And I invited him. I did event planning at that job,
Mhm.
and so I invited him to do the invocation at a luncheon that I was having. And he was new and a lot of people he didn't know a lot of people, so I thought, "I'll just sit him next to me. I know how to
Mhm.
deal with the chaplain."
Right, right.
And and of course, I was also suspicious because I was always suspicious of people who were ministers in any way, shape, or form. But through the whole thing, he was very kind, nice with everybody at the table. And when I got back to and I was very much OCD in my early recovery, very worried about everybody having a good time and
Mhm.
making sure
Mhm.
the details were right. And I got back to my office and I opened my folder and he had taken his placemat or his place setting, and he turned it over, and on the back he put, "Jessica, thank you so much for including me. You did a wonderful job. Love, Paul." He put, "Love, Paul." He just met
Yeah.
me.
Wow.
And over probably the course of about the next 6 months, I would see him on campus, say
Mm.
hi, I was still, and then I said to him one day, I heard the words coming out of my mouth. I know you deal with students a lot here.
Mhm.
Do you ever speak with staff about God? I heard that come out of my mouth. And he said, "Well, of course I do." And I
Yeah.
said, "Well, I think I'd like to come talk to you about God." And well, what do I say about that is that Paul pretty much became, over time, if I could have chosen my dad. If I
Mm.
could have chosen my dad, it
Wow.
would be Paul.
Wow.
He
Wow.
just was the most, and he passed away in September of 2023. And that was just devastating.
Mhm.
Um, but he was encouraging, validating, like everything that a little girl would want from
Yeah.
her
Yeah.
dad.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now I'm very close with his wife, and she just she's extending it
Yeah.
she's extending it for me. It's amazing. It's just absolutely amazing.
God brought someone in your life. Obviously, you loved your father and you respected him, and you mentioned being afraid of him. And God put someone in to renew, to change that look of that minister to you, and
Absolutely.
and that's what God does.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, that's what He will definitely do. Let's talk about what I like to call your spiritual awakening. All right now, how did your studies, because you did go to seminary, how did your studies and discovery of topics like eschatology,
Yeah.
how did that transform your spiritual outlook?
Well, let's just say, it took me 15 I was 15 years clean when I finally really listened to God and went to
Mhm.
seminary. He had been pushing at me for a couple years, probably about 5 years prior to me
Yeah.
going. And, what it did for me was it opened it opened doors that had been closed all my life, because I was learning these things for myself. Like, it wasn't a minister wasn't like, of course, some of my professors were ministers by
Mhm.
trade that became professors. But it wasn't like I was sitting in church and a minister was telling me what to believe.
Yeah.
I was in classes discussing things with other students, with professors. I felt confident there, which was amazing. I mean, it was just amazing that I just felt so good about, um I knew God wanted me there.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I was sitting in my eschatology came into the picture, and for people who don't know, I mean, I didn't know what it meant when I
Yes,
first
please,
heard
please.
about it.
That should have been my
Um
first question. Please explain what it is.
Eschatology, it just means the study of the end times.
Mhm.
So, for example, there's what they call apocalyptic eschatology, which would be like the book of Revelation. It's a vision for the future. It's something that's coming.
Mhm.
Apocalyptic means, in the future. It's a prophecy in the future. Realized eschatology is what most theologians talk about when they talk about the Gospel of John.
Mhm.
In the Gospel of John, you'll notice a lot of times Jesus says, "The time is now." He uses the word now a lot in the Gospel of
Mhm.
John. And so basically what they're saying is Jesus was saying the end times is now. This is
Mhm.
happening now because he was here,
Right.
right? Like, and so those are two forms of eschatology. There are some other ones, but to keep it simple, those are two that most
Mhm.
people understand and that I understand pretty well. What happened to me though was we were studying the book of Revelation in my introduction to New Testament class. And the professor that I had for introduction to New Testament was strictly a PhD. He was not coming from a religious background.
Mm-hmm.
He was just coming from the academic angle. And so he taught everything that way. Like he taught us to learn the history. He taught us to, learn what did the words mean in Greek or in Hebrew or whatever, so that we could decipher for ourselves what we thought the Bible verse actually meant.
Right.
And
Okay.
so it was fascinating to me because this was very new to me. And we were sitting there and I wrote, it was May of 2015. We were almost, I think it was the second to
Mm-hmm.
last class that we had. And I wrote in the margin of my notebook, I still have it somewhere. I wrote, what if, since Jesus spoke in metaphor and symbol all the time,
Mm-hmm.
what if when he was talking about his second coming, he actually meant it was going to be personal? What if he meant he was going to come back just for me or
Hmm.
just for you, singular you? And the
Okay.
reason I thought that is because I had heard in recovery story after story after story of people dying to the person they used to be and becoming what you would say in Christian circles is born again,
Mm-hmm.
becoming a brand new person.
Yeah.
And that awakening that you're talking about hit me like, I mean, I feel like maybe my hair blew back a little bit, really, because I was like, I wonder if that's a real thing. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
maybe because I did have an encounter with Jesus about 6 years before I got into recovery.
Hmm.
I was standing out and it wasn't until that moment in that class that I really remembered it because I had blocked it from my mind because I had so much regret for my actions in it.
Yeah. Yeah.
What happened was I was outside of a party and I was hating my life, of course, because I was still deep in my addictions. And I remember it was January, it was freezing, and I looked up at the sky and it was just beautiful, like a million stars. And I just started yelling at God. Now, I hadn't talked to God in a long time
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I was letting him have it. I'm like, I hate my life. Why are you doing this to me? When is it my turn? All those kind of woe is me self
Mm-hmm.
things. And in that, there was this moment where I knew if I turned, I didn't, but I knew that if I turned my head to the left, Jesus was standing right there. Like physically, he was there. I felt his presence there.
What?
And for a moment, I had a momentary, beautiful sense of peace.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was terrified
Yeah.
and I ran back into the party. I didn't look to my left. I ran
Mhm.
away from him.
Yeah.
And I was so horrified for so long about that, that I'd blocked it from my mind. And when I was sitting there in that New Testament class and I wrote that on the paper, what if it's a personal return for
Mhm.
each one of us? I remembered
Wow.
that
Oh,
Jesus
okay.
had come back for me.
Yeah.
And I was like, and I ran away. And what I realized was there's a part, and I can't remember right now at this moment which gospel it's in. It's probably in more than one, where Jesus says, those who turn away, or something like this, I'm paraphrasing, but he says, those who turn away, there will be weeping and gnashing.
Mhm. Yeah.
And those years between that moment when he showed up for me and I got into recovery, weeping and gnashing of teeth would be a very good description. Those were probably the worst years of my life, and it was like walking in hell. I was alive, and I was here, and I was somewhat present,
Yeah, yeah.
but it was hell. It was horrible. And so to answer the question about the awakening is that it took a very long time
Mhm.
for it to happen. A lot of personal work, a lot of becoming new again over and over and over again, like continuing to die to pieces of myself that were getting in the way. Because after I put the food and the alcohol down,
Mhm.
I noticed selfishness, self-righteousness, self-centeredness, manipulation. I mean, I noticed all these things that I was using to try to control my life. They all just rose to the surface.
Mhm. Wow.
And so I had to die to all of that.
Yep.
And so and it just took a lot of time, as you
Mhm.
can tell. I mean, like 15 years later,
Yeah.
I'm having the awakening.
What does dying to oneself mean to you?
It basically just means, like, I can tell you, um, the woman who walked into that first recovery meeting,
Mhm.
I need to remember she still exists,
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah.
Because if I pick up that first compulsive bite or if I pick up a drink, I know she's gonna rear her ugly head,
Mhm.
okay?
Yeah, yeah.
So she still exists. However, the way that I perceive life today, the way that I react to life today, the peace that I have in my heart today, I didn't I really didn't think it was real. I did not think back then, I thought people who were peaceful were lying.
Yeah. Yeah.
I did not believe that it was a possibility to walk through this chaotic, hateful world and have peace.
That's funny you should say that, because, there there's something that people always say, and they say, you have joy. There's a difference between joy and happiness. And I would say I'm happy, but I never, ever, I could never say I felt joy. And I think about, and it's funny you say that because I think about maybe about a year, 2 years ago, I felt that. And I'm like, I have this joy. I understand what you're saying because it's totally different.
Yes.
It's because it's not dependent upon someone else making you happy. It's just the fact that you have this feel in you and it's just joy.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the indescribable peace, you know, I always say to people who are new in recovery,
Mhm.
I wish that I could put this in a pill so
Right.
that you could feel it for a minute because then you'd want it forever.
Exactly.
But I also know and I believe that had I not gone through all the work I had to do to get here, maybe I wouldn't be feeling it like this.
Yes.
So I don't wanna rob people of that
Mhm.
either.
Right.
I'll say to people, "Just have faith in my faith." Because that's what a lot I'll never forget when one of my first mentors in the program, she suggested that I write a letter to God
Mhm.
and tell him how angry I was.
Yeah.
And I remember saying to her, "I can't I can't do that." I mean, I was sober now and, I was looking around for the lightning bolt to hit me,
Yeah.
just the
Yeah.
fact that I was, in a place talking about God that wasn't church, and she said to me, "Jessica, it worked for me."
Mhm.
She's like, "Just have faith that it worked for me.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
you didn't come to me for help because things that you were doing are working."
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. So I did it,
Well,
and I did, and I used her faith for a
yeah.
little while.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's switch gears a little bit. Let's talk about your book. Can you tell talk a little bit about your book and what you hope readers will take away from it?
Sure, yes. One of the reasons I wanted to write this is because I was terrified about
Mhm.
the end of the world
Yeah.
pretty much my entire upbringing, and, my dad was a bit of a fire and brimstone kind of preacher,
Mhm.
and, uh, and there were a lot of really scary movies in the '70s and '80s about what was gonna happen, and, it never was good.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I knew I was a sinner. I knew I was gonna be one of the people who was thrown into the burning fires. And so I just was terrified of it. And so I did my thesis on this idea of personal eschatology when I was in
Mhm.
seminary, and I used three three men in the Bible who showed what I consider to be personal eschatology, where they did a complete 180. They changed from what they thought when you first met them to meeting Jesus, and
Mm-hmm.
then they became something
I wonder,
completely
I
different.
wonder who one of those people were.
So, well, there was Nicodemus,
Mm-hmm.
who was the Pharisee that
Yes.
came to Jesus in the night, and by the end of when Jesus was being resurrected, or when Jesus was resurrected, by that point, Nicodemus was anointing his body for burial, and that was what I learned about was that was really expensive, first
Yeah.
of all, to do. He gave up all his funds to do that, and he did it publicly. He went with another Pharisee to do it. And this was not something, like the Jewish people the Pharisees were not believing in
Mm-hmm.
Jesus. So the fact
Right.
that he came out publicly and did it was a complete 180. Then the story of Lazarus,
Mm-hmm.
who Jesus resurrected from the dead after he'd been dead for 4 days. I use him to talk about the recovery community and how Jesus is the one who saves us,
Yeah.
but then he looks to the community. If you remember, he says to people, unbind him.
Mm-hmm.
Tells the people to roll the
Yeah.
stone away. So he's basically illustrating for us how important community is, and
Mm-hmm.
that we need people around us to help us once we're saved, right?
Right.
And then the Apostle Paul,
Mm-hmm.
who is, persecuting Christians left and right. And then Jesus shows up and blinds him for a
No,
couple days.
yeah.
And
Knocks
says,
him off his horse and
"Persecuted."
blinds him. Yeah.
And he becomes the greatest apostle, probably.
Mhm. Yeah.
And so I use those 3 guys to make my point and to get an A, of course, because I had to get an A when I was
Right.
writing my thesis. And then what happened was, I graduated in May of 2020, which was when the COVID pandemic was in full force.
Mhm.
And I don't know if you watched the show The Chosen. Have you ever heard
Yes,
of
of course. Of
it?
course.
Well, it had just been the first 4 episodes had just been released in the fall of 2019, and I had heard little rumblings about it from friends or on social media,
Mhm.
but I had seen a lot of Christian media, and it was usually pretty corny.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I was kinda like, "Ah, I'm busy with school, I don't have time." Well, after I graduated and it was the pandemic, there was nothing to do. And so they released it for free. The people at The Chosen decided, "We're gonna release this for free because of what's going on in the world right
Mhm.
now. We wanna give something to people, to lift them up." And so I thought, "Well, it's free,
Mhm.
I'm gonna watch it." Well, it just it blew me away.
Yeah. So
And as I was watching that first season, I thought to myself, because they actually in the first season is the 7th episode is the conversation between Nicodemus and
Mhm.
Jesus
Yeah.
that I spent like 3 years studying. And so I'm watching this and I'm thinking to myself, there is so much more to say about personal
Mm.
eschatology. I need to take my story and weave it through those 3 guys that I talked about in my
Yeah,
thesis,
yeah.
because the born again piece of me needs to get that. It needs to come out. It needs to, no matter how crazy people might think I am for this idea,
Mhm.
because it's not in theological circles, they don't talk about personal eschatology, and I thought to myself, "I don't care if people think I'm crazy.
Yeah.
This is a possibility, and that's all I'm asking people to believe." I'm not saying that Revelation isn't real. I'm not
Mhm.
saying that, the Gospel of John's not real. I'm saying that this is a possibility for another way of looking at the things Jesus was saying. Because one of the things that Paul, my mentor Paul, used to talk to me about all the time is, Jessica, Jesus said a lot of stuff 2,000 years ago,
Yeah.
and they wrote it down. And he was saying it to a group of people that
Mhm.
had a completely different mindset than we have today.
Right.
He was saying it for us too. And he said to me, he said, just because he was talking to a crowd 2,000 years older than us does not mean he didn't know that we were going to be reading this 2,000 years later.
Exactly.
And so
Exactly.
there's something in every verse for you, specifically for you. And that's how you want to read the Bible. You want to read it like he's talking directly to you.
Mhm.
And there was one scene in The Chosen where one of the disciples goes to visit John the Baptist in prison. And he's very worried about John the Baptist because
Mhm.
he's in prison. And Jesus had just delivered the Sermon on the Mount, and John's asking the disciple, "What did you hear in the sermon?"
Mhm.
There was something in there just for you.
Yeah, yeah.
And I heard Paul saying to me, "There's something in there that's just for you."
Mhm.
And it just validated the idea is mine, and perhaps it's just for me, maybe. But
Yeah.
I would really like to share it with people, which is why I wrote the book, because maybe there's people out there who are terrified like I was, and maybe they need a softer approach, because it
Yeah.
really has calmed my spirit
Mhm.
in a great way. It has brought me a lot closer to God, which is amazing. Because I had to go into the Gospel of John a lot in order to study this and write my thesis and everything. And in that gospel, it is just so much more prevalent how much God loves Jesus and how much God loves us.
Mm. Mm. Amen, amen. When I rededicated my life to Christ and started going back to church, quite some time ago, one of the things, and I never forget, he was one of my, he taught me a lot. And I always say, even though I was an adult, I called myself a baby Christian. And I never forget him. He was my pastor, Pastor Garland B. Ligon. And he said something. He told me when he presented me with a Bible. And one of the things he said, he gave me this acronym, and the acronym for the Holy Bible. I don't know if you've ever heard it. And it's uh the Holy Bible. He only loves you. Basic instructions before leaving Earth. The Holy Bible, right?
Oh,
And
I
when you
love
said,
that.
and when you said, that he, eh, that it brought it back,
Oh,
and I'm like, that's, I've never forgotten that.
oh, I love that. Can I?
Yeah. Of course you can. Of course you can.
I love
Yes.
that.
Yes. He only loves you.
You know what that makes me think of? One of my favorite authors, C.S. Lewis,
Mhm.
said, and I'm going to butcher the quote, but he said something to the effect of, "I know how much God loves me because I know that if I were the only man on earth, Jesus still would have climbed up on that cross just
Mhm.
for me."
That's right. Yes.
And that's that oh, I love that.
Yes. Yes.
Love that.
Yes. Mm.
Oh, that's beautiful.
What's the name of your book? We didn't even get to that. What's
It's called Higher Powered.
higher powered?
And the, subtitle is One Woman's Journey of Personal Eschatology.
Okay. Woman's journey of personal
Eschatology. And
eschatology.
if it makes you feel any better, I remember when I first told my older sister that that's what I was gonna do my thesis on, she said, "Is that English?" I'm like,
Or is that Latin? So, Jessica, for those who are struggling with similar issues of addiction and faith, what advice would you give based on your experiences?
based on my experience,
Mhm.
I would say look for recovery.
Mhm.
If you have an addiction, you pretty much know you do.
Yeah. Mhm.
And there's a 12-step program for pretty much anything. I mean, it started for alcoholism, but you can pretty much find one for any substance,
Mhm.
there's programs for people who have gambling addiction, for people who
Yeah.
have sex and love addiction.
Mhm.
There's all kinds of programs out there. So look for it, whatever your thing is. Because for me, my experience was that had to get out of the way before I could let God in.
Yeah. Yeah.
And and that's not to say that it doesn't happen the other way around, because I have met people who go to church and they get saved and they stop drinking and
Mm-hmm.
they stop whatever.
Yeah.
So everybody's journey is different, you know? And so I guess th- my biggest piece of advice would be try to or just pray for an open mind.
Yeah.
Pray for an open mind and an open heart, because even if you don't believe in God, just pray. Just take my word for it. Because in the beginning, for me, I just would say, "Help me."
Mm-hmm.
I just would say, because I didn't know what to say.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I was taught very early on, you also need to say thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and I had a friend who used to say, even if that's all you say, help me and thank you, that's enough.
Yeah.
God knows what you need.
He knows your heart. He
Yeah.
sees your heart. He knows.
Yeah. But do it.
Mm.
Stop saying, "I can't because,"
Mm-hmm.
you know, because that was a big thing for me. "I can't do this right now because,"
Right.
you know, and it's like, you know what? It's never gonna be a good time.
Yeah.
So just
Just
do it
do it.
now. Yeah,
Just do it, right?
exactly. Yeah.
Jessica, what are you grateful for?
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
My life, the way exactly the way it is today, I and if you'd have asked me that when I got into recovery, would I want this life that I have now? I would have said, "Oh, what a bore."
Yeah.
You know, but I love my life. I do a gratitude list every day. I exchange gratitudes with fellow travelers in my programs. And, you know, one of the things that's usually always on there, I love going for a walk.
Mm-hmm.
Being in, you know, hearing
Yeah.
birds and seeing
Yeah.
squirrels and deer and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would say that, you know, one of my big gratitudes is that I can walk by myself in nature. My body
Mm.
works, you know? I mean, there
Yeah.
are so many people who don't have it really is a privilege, I think, to be
That's
able to get
yep.
out there. And like today, I usually take my walk at the end of the day. And since
Mm-hmm.
we were sitting down at 6 o'clock, I thought at lunchtime, I was like, you know what? I'm going out now because I want to get a shower in before that interview. And so I did, and it was lovely. It was
Yeah.
absolutely lovely.
Yeah.
And so I'm grateful to be in a place where I have that privilege to be able to just go outside and walk and not worry
Mm.
about, you know, where I live, or I know I'm gonna be safe. And,
Yeah.
you know, and that I guess too, that, you know, God doesn't give up on us. And
Never.
I know that today.
We
There was a
give up on
time.
ourselves,
Yes.
but God will never give up on us. He will
Yes.
never give up on us.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If my listeners want to get in touch with you, get your book, uh, how can they reach you?
I have a website
Mm-hmm.
for pretty much everything, for my books, for spiritual direction. There's a contact form on there. It's just jessicalmorris.com. Um, and my books are on Amazon. I have a daily meditation book that I wrote
Mm-hmm.
about 10 years ago, and then this one, and now I'm writing a third. My husband gave me the wink and in the fall and said this was a time that I could stop working and start writing full time. And he said, you know, I'm going to retire in a couple years, and I really would like you to have health insurance by
Mm-hmm.
then so that I can retire. And so I have a couple years to just make a go of it and see if I can make this writing ministry a real thing. So I'm praying for that, but it's all, and I'm also doing spiritual direction on the side, which is something that I tripped over when I was in seminary. I didn't even know that was a thing either. And so, you know, I get to sit with people and talk to them about their God journeys. It's just
Oh,
absolutely,
that's
it's
beautiful.
amazing. I
Yeah.
love it. I
Yeah.
love it. And sometimes I'm like, I cannot believe these people are paying me for this, because I feel like they get so much out of it, because we're talking about God the whole time. It's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jessica, do you have any final thoughts, any last words you'd like to say?
Um, you know what? What are you grateful for? I'd love to know.
I
It's been
am great.
lovely talking to you.
Hey, thank you. I am grateful just for people like you who come on this show, my podcast, and share your journeys. God put this in my heart to do this show, and I wanted to bring forth stories of encouragement and letting people know that no matter what you do in life, um, you can always come out. Whatever happens to you in life, you can always come out. You can always get through it. With God's love, anything is possible. No, health wise, fitness wise, anything is
Yes,
possible.
yes.
And sometimes people don't even realize that um, God is in everything that they do. They don't even you said it before, you don't even some people who know don't even believe, but God is still there because there's someone that's praying for you,
Yeah.
someone that you may have walked past on the street and prays for you. And
Yes.
I'm so grateful that God put it in my heart to bring something like this to the forefront. You
And
know,
you listened.
and I listened.
Yes, it's
I
beautiful.
tried to run away. I'm not gonna lie, Jessica. I tried to run away because I'm like, but through a online Bible study class, I met a really, really beautiful soul, a beautiful woman, and who encourages me. And to this day, I'll call her my mentor, even though she's younger than me. I'll call her my mentor. And she told me something. She said, Sheila, just do it afraid. And you know what? I took that advice and I haven't stopped. So that's what I'm grateful for. That I get to meet such amazing people like yourself.
Oh, oh, well, thank you. You're amazing. I mean, you've
Thank
been a
you.
delight to talk to. This is
Thank
awesome.
you.
It's just
Thank you
awesome.
so much, Jessica. And to my listeners, I just want to say Jessica's experience reminds us that even in our most challenging of times, change is possible. Through her encounters with wise mentors and her deep spiritual exploration, she has discovered that true healing comes from letting go of the past and embracing power. Jessica's message is clear. By taking daily intentional steps to die to oneself, we can all create a space deep with a deeper connection with Jesus. I hope Jessica's insights has inspired you and invite you to explore the possibilities of renewal and connection in your own life. And if Jessica's story resonated with you, be sure to check out her book for more information and the spiritual insights she has to share. If you have enjoyed this conversation as much as I did, share, like, and don't forget to hit that subscription button so you never miss an episode of Sheila's Take. Until next time, remember, each new day is an opportunity to take another step towards the life you are meant to live. This is Sheila's Take. I'm your host, Sheila Dunbar. Be blessed. Thank you. Until next time, remember to embrace the journey, build lasting connections, and step boldly into all that life has in store for you. I'm your host, Sheila Dunbar. Blessings to you.